Today is the third webinar delivered by the Upper Hunter Mining Dialogue to discuss a range of topical issues with various technical experts. Before we get into this session, I just wanted to go over some of the housekeeping. As you might have just heard, this session is being recorded, and we ask you to stay on mute to avoid any disruption to our presenters today. If you don't wish to be recorded, please just turn your camera off. And we will be uploading the recording from today's webinar onto our website after the session. We're going to have some time at the end of today's session for some questions. So if you've got any questions, please enter them into the chat as we go, or you can take yourself off mute at the end of the session and ask the questions directly then. So just a little bit of background. Today's webinar is on learnings from other regional transitions. And there's been a lot of discussion about economic transition through the dialogue and at our 2024 community forum in Singleton. And it was really clear from that feedback from the room that post-mining land use is a top priority for the region. A majority of the feedback from the workshop, which was led by the Institute for Regional Futures, reflected on concerns around economic diversification, job creation and retention, and future opportunities for the region as some mining operations draw to a close. So building on this, the dialogue working groups have been exploring lessons from other regions globally that have undergone similar economic transitions, and we've been looking at how those insights can be applied to the Upper Hunter. There's already a significant amount of work underway across universities, industry, and state and local government on the opportunities for the Hunter region, including post-mining land use opportunities and long-term regional development strategies. And a key part of this work is learning from other regions which have undergone those similar transitions. And so today we're joined by Associate Professor Jessica Reeves, who has extensive experience in this area. And I'm just going to run through Jessica's bio here. So Jessica is a place-based sustainability science researcher in the Future Regions Research Centre of Federation University Australia, based in the Latrobe Valley in Gippsland, Victoria. With a background in geology, she researches the interplay between humans and their environment through time, including industrial pollution, long-term human modification of landscapes, and future regional transitions. She's particularly interested in elevating community voices around environmental stewardship, incorporating multiple ways of knowing place, and facilitating community engagement in energy transition. So welcome, Jess. Thanks so much for joining us and taking the time to share your knowledge with us. I'm going to hand over to you to run through your presentation.
Many thanks, James. I'm just getting saying allow presenters to multiple presenters to share.
If you try again now, it might work.
Can you see my screen in presenter mode?
Yes, we can.
Thanks.
Excellent. Great. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us over lunch today. It's fabulous to see some familiar faces, and even better to see some people that I don't know that I look forward to speaking with. I guess we're kind of very much living all aspects of transition here in Gippsland. We've got our own little living laboratory here. So I'm going to be speaking about some places that I've visited, but also research that I've been doing directly in this region. So let's see if we can get onto the next slide. Not at the moment. Okay. So I'd also like to acknowledge country. I'm coming to you today from the country of the Bryarkalong people of the Gunai Kurnai Nation. And I'd like to extend my respects to their elders past and present, also to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, and particularly those of the Wonnarua and surrounding nations in the Hunter region. So just a bit of an outline of what I'd like to go through with you today. Arguably, the first part of the presentation is, as I said jokingly to Lisa and James, photos from my holidays or trips that I made to both the US and to Eastern Europe over the last 2 years, looking specifically at regions in transition there. And then also reflecting very briefly on some experiences closer to home, such as in Collie, but more specifically the work that I've been doing with my colleague Tira Ferran in the Latrobe Valley here around post-mine land use and really actively engaging the community here in a co-design process. We'll touch then a little bit on what makes the Hunter different, and I'll try and give you some of my learnings, overall learnings of what the secret sauce is for successful regional transformation. I'm very happy for you to disagree with me, but we'll use that as a starting point. So I've got 2 academic slides for you, and then we'll get into the juicier stuff. But this concept of just transition, it's a word or a phrase that gets bandied around a lot. A lot of people don't like either of those terms, either just or the transition idea. There's a sense of loss associated with it as well. But just to put it up front, the definition comes very much from the labor movement of the US from the 1980s, and it's a conceptual framework in which the labor movement captures the complexities of transition toward a low carbon and climate resilient economy, highlighting public policy needs and aiming to maximize benefits and minimizing hardships for workers and their communities in this transformation. Okay, but what does that actually mean? Is it just about transition? So when we unpack this, we've got to think about what this really means, particularly for people on the ground, for the host communities of these legacy industries, but also the industries that we're moving into. So this includes aspects of how the various parties are involved in those solutions. Do they have a role in that? If there are to be burdens and benefits in these regions, are they distributed evenly and or fairly, depending on what the case may be? And thinking about how different people may be impacted, whether it's workers and others within the region or extended families, or even the different ways that people may interact. People from culturally, linguistically diverse backgrounds or First Nations people are going to have different experiences of what that transition is. So how do we account for each of those? In terms of the just transition literature, when we're talking about environmental justice, this is really looking at the health burden that particularly the host communities have carried for being able to provide the goods and services to the rest of communities. So in the case of the Latrobe Valley, the increased cases of black lung and asbestosis for people in this region in being able to provide power for the rest of the state. We have opportunities for restorative justice as well. So particularly when we've got long-term industries that didn't necessarily take into consideration First Nations rights and values when they were first established, we have a chance of being able to apply restorative justice in our transition and as an act of reconciliation of how do we bring these groups really at the forefront of decision-making going forward. Thinking about intergenerational justice as well, can we actually ensure that our kids and our grandkids are going to have at least the same opportunities we had, if not better? And what does that actually mean? Is it just economic opportunity or is it environmental opportunity as well? And this idea of one that we've added, which is the idea of temporal justice and our sense of identity and how our sense of place and purpose is so much linked to our work in many cases, and how our identity and our history gets lost a little bit when these things change really, really quickly. So how do we acknowledge that and make space for that as we move forward, rather than pretending, you know, that's our dirty past that we want to move away from? That's certainly a big factor playing out in the Latrobe here. So now to the fun bit. That's your theory lesson. Let's get on to the fun bit. So I'd like to talk first about a trip that I did to North America on the back of a Global Coal Transitions Conference. So this is a project that was supported by the National Science Foundation in the US for the Global Coal Transition Network. It was a conference held in Columbus, Ohio in July of 2024. And this is the first time I'd really come together with people from other coal regions. And it was a very different flavour of energy transition from what's referred to as the global north and the global south. And I think interestingly in the Hunter, you're living both of these at the same time. So here we have representation here from what's referred to as the BRICS countries. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and also the Gulf states. And seeing that they are expanding their use of coal as at that time, the US and Europe were moving away from coal use. And they had this mantra of energy security before energy transition. Why can't we have the same advantages that you have had? And certainly in the export industry, for export of coal, this is going to continue for some time yet. Other regions were seeing actually that the fossil fuel transition was actually creating more mining than there was beforehand. So particularly Scandinavian countries, there's been a vast increase because of the access to critical minerals that they have there. So certainly the transition away from fossil fuels does not necessarily mean a transition away from mining. It's just a different type of mining in different places, perhaps. So ultimately, transitioning to renewable energy actually means more mining altogether. But perhaps we can plan a little bit better how we do that this time. So that was some key learnings. We also had a fantastic field trip, and these are all images taken from around Ohio. And a few things I found really interesting, particularly when this same this research group came to Queensland last year, went to the Bowen Basin. So in the US, they've had the abandoned mine land reclamation program since 1977, where funds from current coal mining gets invested directly into reclamation and rehabilitation of previous mine land. So the idea of leaving abandoned land or even land in care and maintenance is a bit of an anathema in the US. They would rather see it had a purposeful use. So just some examples here. There's a fantastic rhinoceros sanctuary in Ohio, which is a bit of a surprise to me, but a fabulous use of space and lots of revegetation as well. I'll just draw your attention to the muskie bucket in there. And I don't have the photo that has the whole delegation of 100-odd people standing in it, but you can get a sense of the size. If you stand next to it, you can't quite get to the top of the stairs. So this is what was used for strip mining. And then this is the revegetation that can happen afterwards. It's not necessarily the best quality in terms of biodiversity, but at least it's a bit of a better view than complete strip mining. So there's certainly challenges with this. So there's still extensive land degradation and groundwater contamination. And there's also, in terms of the use of pit lakes in mine restoration, wetland banking. So being able to invest in the offsets of rehabilitation of these pit lakes for biodiversity purposes, in being able to offset that against new developments in other areas. The EPA is also, at least previous to the new Trump administration, I'm not sure if this is still active, but at the time had their repowering land initiative, which was going to brownfield mine sites and matching these to appropriate renewable energy projects to be fit for purpose. I'm not going to go through these in details, but again, this was pre the Trump 2 administration, so in a couple of years back, but there was very significant investment that was going directly to these impacted towns to look for both rehabilitation of these mine lands, but also investment in the communities. Now, the funding was available. It wasn't necessarily getting, it was certainly some regions were benefiting more than others, but at least there was a lot of attention being put into both how do you transform these sites, but also how do you transform these communities. So you don't need to know the details here, just there is a lot of money that was put into this, and particularly towards climate action and moving towards renewable energy. Of course, we've seen a bit of a change from that. But having money is not enough. And what I also found interesting on this trip was hearing about a lot of these organisations, a lot of not-for-profits that had set up to help bridge the gap between both the literacy and the understanding of what these funding opportunities were and what the needs in each of those communities were as well. So having people on the ground who can work with the communities and help realise these opportunities is critical to success. Money alone is not enough. You need those people to be able to do the translation pieces and also do that sort of higher level visioning exercises in order to match those opportunities to overall regional growth. Another really valuable thing that I saw was their use of space, of left behind spaces. So this is actually a steelworks in Pittsburgh rather than a mine site. But this is a site that was left behind that then was basically taken over by guerrilla artists over a 12-month period. They made this stag head that kept appearing on videos over time. And then the local council said, oh, hang on, people are actually using this site. Can we use this as an arts hub? So now they have historical tours and they have arts hubs, arts activations here, and they have an annual graffiti competition where people come in and paint one of the walls. So it's really activating these left behind spaces in a different way. Another issue that lens on things that I hadn't really considered before is this idea of carbon sovereignty. And we had the benefit of hearing from Andrew Curley, who's a Dene man from the Navajo Nation, and he spoke about the Navajo mine being one of the largest mines in the US, and that is owned by Navajo people and have 85% Navajo staff. So the concept here of carbon transition for them was pretty challenging, because that means losing revenue and losing jobs in the short term. So the simple narrative of Indigenous peoples don't want mining or don't want participation in energy generation is a little bit naive. And so at least having the questions or having the conversations in each of those communities of what does transition mean and how can it be meaningful for you as well, and see another positive future after that, is critically important too. So don't make assumptions. The next fun trip that I went on was with my daughter, this time to Eastern Europe, and I was at the invitation of a delegation between the Australian Germany Economic and Industry Forum, and they'll be visiting the Hunter region next year, so you'll get a chance to meet some of these people. I know Roberta subscribed to this webinar, so you might see her there. And so we went to the Lausitz in May last year, and were invited to participate in what you see here, which is the East German Economic Forum. And interesting, the things that I took away from that particular session was some of the challenges that the forum was sharing. And so the East German area, and yes, they do still call themselves the East German Economic Forum, even post-reunification, is that the region has been progressively decarbonising, but right at the time of reunification and the cessation of the GDR, there are around 80% of jobs lost in that region. So a very, very significant impact. And so the state invested heavily in both the rehabilitation of these sites, the cleanup of the lands, but also new job opportunities as well. So the current challenges, though, after the wave of Syrian and other migrants that came through, still being able to integrate those into those communities, particularly in the east of Europe. When reunification happened, a lot of the younger people moved to the west, and they haven't gone back to the east. The energy crisis, since Russia has invaded Ukraine, has cut off the gas pipeline there, also at a time when Germany is moving out of nuclear energy, so it's a real issue. And there has been significant economic stagnation over the past 3 years, with each of these things having an influence. Interestingly, though, I found with German society and economy, people tend to save their money in bank accounts rather than investing in shares as well. So a lot of the big companies are family-owned companies. They're not shareholder companies. And it's quite a clunky bureaucracy requiring, real signatures and real paper. There was also an issue that was addressed, was this disconnect between these high-level transition activities, focused on high-tech activities, and not actually benefiting the local people in those regions. And an example of this is an astrophysics research centre that's being set up in the community of Görlitz, looking to employ around 1,000 people, of whom very few will come from Görlitz, but they will take over the housing and increase the rental prices, or people will need to commute. So there are challenges. So when we're looking at some of the more positive new economic activities, and I've put this slide in specifically for Will Rifkin, we have Boomtown Cottbus here. Some of the more successful in terms of being able to integrate local people opportunities was a train maintenance and manufacturing company was set up, which employed 14,000 people. And because of the strong technological past, and particularly in chemical manufacturing, a strong technical sector set up as well, with over 2,000 employees. And these are specifically looking in the chemical sector, but also being able to support the renewables energy, particularly in battery storage. So with this idea of moving towards a net zero valley in Lusatia. But lots of high-tech science parks, and also specialisation in health science and medical training. Rehabilitation continues as well. This is a major effort. They've got a lot of big holes in the ground to look after, and this is undertaken by one organisation funded through the state, who owns and operates the rehabilitation of the coal mines. So around 35,000 hectares that they are looking after. in being able to rehabilitate. Now, there's still significant challenges for acid mine drainage, and we can see here one of the water treatment plants that is actually removing iron out of the water to go back into the pit lakes, and also constant liming that is required to try and neutralize that water. And there's also really interesting challenges with the closure of coal mines. The coal mines were being dewatered, and that water was then returned to the River Spree. So you're lowering the water table, returning that water to the River Spree. That is the water that feeds Berlin. And so when they stop doing that and the water tables go back up to fill the pit voids, that's going to cause a decrease in the amount of flow going into the River Spree. So there's serious concerns for the water supply for Berlin over the next 10 years. So this idea of cumulative effects of such a large footprint of mining and the rehabilitation needs to be considered in a really regional perspective to be effective. And if your German's not that good, this is a research institute for post-mine land use. So this institute has been going since the early 90s and continues to develop world-class research building into rehabilitation. Going down to Leipzig and the Saxony-Anhalt region, there's been a real revitalization of this region post brown coal mining, lots of heavy investments in technology, but also strong culture as well. We happened to be there the week of the World Gothic Festival, where there were 20,000 Goths in town, which was quite spectacular. But here they've really used some of their mine rehabilitation for both recreation and for biodiversity. So whether it's water activities, water-based activities, some lakes are only accessible by cycling or walking. You can't drive there. And there's in fact some areas that are set aside for biodiversity conservation, including bringing back the European bison. And apparently there is a mob of emu at one of these lakes as well. Not quite sure how they got there. So in summary, the lessons from Germany was that there's very different experiences of transition in the different regions. Some are redeveloped and really prospering and increasing that sense of livability. Others are still a bit left behind in terms of the local communities and their ability to participate in the new activities that have been created in these areas. And their priorities for post-mine land use are very different as well. For Leipzig, it seems to be largely recreation and tourism, supporting that livability, whereas in Cottbus, it's more about setting up this new industries and new activities. Both of them were hosts of the international design competitions, which went for around 10 years, which had some level of community involvement as well, but it's a little bit challenging to see what the long-term impact has been of those design competitions. And not a lot of those things have fed their way through into realisation from what I can see or what I understand from the ground. The level of investment and governance has been significant. So both funding from the EU and from both federal and state funding within Germany itself. So we're talking tens of billions of dollars in each of those regions. So very significantly funded, very different situation to what we have here. And whilst there is some community input, particularly in those design competitions, most of the decisions are very much top down. And I was being asked by colleagues, and again in Berlin later in the year, there's not a lot of space for community voices and community activations to happen. So they actually want to learn from us how we do that. The mine rehabilitation itself brings up that question of who should take ultimate responsibility and how do we look at those cumulative impacts, particularly on things such as regional water supply. So there it's a whole state-based approach. How do you do that if it's individual operators? And we need to really think about that. So I'll touch just briefly now on one of the examples that we have more locally of successful, in inverted commas, mine rehabilitation. Many of you will be familiar with Collie. There was Lake Kepwari, which has been not functional as a mine for quite some time. It took the community around 20 years to get support to have it rehabilitated to a lake that was accessible for rehabilitation. And I can testify it gets very well used. I was there during one school holidays, and there was, you couldn't get a park hardly because of the amount of campers that were there. Very well utilised, which is great to see. And again, this is the state stepping in and developing or co-developing between the community, the strong union presence there in the state, a just transition package to help redevelop this region. So both attracting new projects, but also a significant rebranding exercise. So the big mural projects and lots of outdoor recreation activities. Although there's the history of mining there, you wouldn't think it was a mining town now by looking at it, except from the historical perspective. There's also funding set aside for community-based projects as well, and building on some of the expertise in the region by the development of the Emergency Services Training Centre that's flourishing there and supporting the forestry industry there as well. So I think to think about this too, when we think about transitioning, what are we actually transitioning to? And so it's a journey, it's not a destination in many cases. So we need to think about what that bridge is and where we want to get to, and how do we think about what that endpoint is, particularly when we're looking at post-mine land use. And thinking about what skills are in our existing industries and how do we map and match those and expand those opportunities to a broader cross-section of the community to be able to participate in whatever those new opportunities are. Lesson from the US, if there is retraining offered, certainly ensure that the industries are there and the actual jobs are there at the end. You're not just retraining for the sake of retraining, you're doing it with purpose and with intent. Also consider alignment between what seems like disparate interests. So the unions and the environmentalists together, they can actually come together and find a lot of common points for net good for the region. If you want ultimate economic success, just getting a new big thing in the region isn't really the answer. Looking for diversification is probably a safer bet, and look for something that's going to bring extra money into the region. So export for growth, for example, and for the longer term resilience of your region as well. Money helps, absolutely, no question, but knowing where you're going and what your part is in that shared vision is really important as well, and having good governance of being able to lead that vision is really critical. Also, something that I'm particularly passionate about, and I shout out to a couple of people I know who are on the webinar here, is that it's very important that young people actually see themselves in what that future state is going to be as well, and they're excited about it and they want to participate in it. It's not just the loss of the things that aren't here anymore, so they can't see that future vision, but they can build it themselves and participate in it. And this gap we often see in regions that are transitioning. There's about a 20-year lag between the old industry closing and the new industry really establishing. So that's a whole generation of people who are missing out on opportunities. So ensuring you've got some of those things happening in between to fill that gap. And just be careful for what you wish for, because there's 29 prisons that have been built in the Appalachian region since 1989 on reclaimed mined land. So lift your aspirations a little higher than that, please. So I'd just like to switch tack now and start to talk about the Latrobe. If you've got any questions about that, please feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll come back to them afterwards. But something a little bit, well, a lot closer to home, in fact, I can see it out of my office window here, is the Latrobe Valley and this fabulous project that we did, collaborative planning with the mine operators, relevant government departments, the Gunai Kurnai Land and Waters Aboriginal Corporation and local community members to come up with a vision for the future of the valley. So just a tiny bit of history for you. This is Bryakalong country. There has been a mining for energy generation since the 1920s, was under the State Electricity Company and then privatised in the 1990s, which looked at, resulted in about 75% of redundancies here. So quite a similar story and a similar timeline to what happened in East Germany as well. Other really significant impacts that we had in the region was collapse in 2007 of the Yallourn mine, the Hazelwood mine fire in 2014, which then set off a health inquiry, which led to a lot of the implementations that were then put in place. So the establishment of the Latrobe Health Advocate, the Latrobe Health Assembly, and the Latrobe Valley Regional Rehabilitation Strategy, and what became the Mineland Rehabilitation Authority, all came out of that mine fire inquiry. Come back to that later. We also had Hazelwood close unexpectedly before time in 2017, a month after I moved to the Latrobe Valley. We have our second mine, Yallourn, closing in 2028, and Loy Yang A, owned by AGL, so Loy Yang A Power Station, owned by AGL, closing in 2035. So we've got brown coal, we haven't got black coal. If we don't burn it straight away, it isn't much good to us. So it's quite a different situation to the Hunter, I acknowledge, but we know that the end is the end here. Well, most people do. There's some people that are still struggling with that a little bit, but there's less resistance these days. And just to bear in mind that this isn't the only change that's happening in this region. We also have decommissioning of offshore oil and gas, and we've got offshore wind probably coming. We've got the auction process starting in August here. We're also having an expansion of onshore wind, of solar farms and critical mineral mines. We had the cessation of native timber harvesting at the end of 2024, an expansion of plantation timber, particularly pines as well, which has had an impact on our paper mill, which is the other big industrial employer in the Latrobe Valley region. And we're seeing a lot of change in the agricultural sector in response to a changing climate as well. So there's a lot happening here. It's a good place to be. But just looking at the coal-fired power stations themselves, they produce, the Latrobe Valley is responsible for about $7.5 billion worth of gross regional product, and about $1 billion of this will be a direct loss once the power station closes to the local councils here. So in terms of revenue from the power stations to the immediate local area, it's about $1 billion loss that we need to make up for. We already have significant unemployment and particularly low participation rates. And two of our towns here, Moe and Morwell, are in the lowest 1% of socioeconomics in the country. So we're already in a pretty rocky state, and we don't need things to get worse. We have an aging population like many regional areas do. And whatever statistics you look at, they're all worse for Indigenous people in the region. In terms of where we focused our work here, so this is the Latrobe Valley. For those of you who are not familiar, these are our 3 mines and the 4 power stations. There's 2 at Loy Yang that are associated with these mines. You will see that the mines are basically an equivalent size to our townships as well. And the area that we were focusing our work on was these grey areas, or the buffer zones around the mines. So they sum to around 10,000 hectares of land that will become available for other purposes after the rehabilitation of the mines to a safe, stable and sustainable state. So we looked at this from a strengths-based perspective. We've got a lot of land, we've got a skilled workforce, we have an education hub, we've got our City of Melbourne expanding forever along the southeastern corridor, so a lot more people moving out this area. Quite a significant area of industrial zone land that's a lot cheaper than that around Melbourne. And I have to say, putting it in a strengths-based perspective is something I learned from the Hunter Valley, because you're really good at it. We're historically bad at it. We're adjacent to rich biodiversity assets. We've got national parks on either side of the valley. Good climate, fertile soils, lots of rainfall, a bit too much rainfall at the moment. And a strong Aboriginal presence as well, both in terms of local community members, but also the strength of our Aboriginal corporation here. So we have real opportunity to define a new identity for the valley, not the stinky, dirty place that people have been trying to avoid and young people have been leaving for so long. So we decided to couch this as a wicked opportunity, not a wicked problem. We did a lot of foundation work with all of the operators, government departments and First Nations organisations to work out what was going to be what we could share with the public, what the land suitability was for different land uses, and determine the priorities for the region in line with existing regional development strategies. So of the regional development strategies that have been developed for Gippsland, and there are many, which of those things would be best suited to these mine lands? So where is the competitive advantage that these mine lands present compared to other areas of Gippsland or other areas of Victoria? We did this through a collaborative design process, looked at it through multi-criteria analysis with various stakeholders, came up with an economic assessment tool for the different land development scenarios, and came up with outputs that one of our operators said, can we have something that's useful and usable? We don't just want a report that no one can read, we want something useful and usable. The land use types that we looked at were industrial, biodiversity conservation, cultural, recreational, food and fibre, and residential. And we have various subcategories for those. And we got experts in each of these areas to describe which things would be most useful in each of these categories for these sites, and then use those as an education program for the various community groups that we worked with. Now, after we come up with those parameters of what was possible and ground truthed it, We then really went to active community participation, trying to get different people involved in these discussions. So we looked really carefully of who we wanted to have involved. We wanted young people, we wanted First Nations people, and we wanted a demographic cross-section of the Latrobe Valley. So we set up 3 very separate methods to be able to do that. We had lots of collaboration with experts to work out how to work with each of these groups best, and each group came from a values-based and a community-led perspective. We really valued people's knowledge about these sites and their own lived and shared experience as well. And so it wasn't as if we were telling them things, it was very much a knowledge exchange, and we learned a lot. And we visited the sites and had engagement with the sites in different ways. And we took time for deliberation. It wasn't just a one-off session. We also made sure we had plenty of time to sit down together and literally break bread and hear from each other, and so build that trust with the operators and the government in the room as well. And we really wanted the community to have ownership of the outcome. We called them donuts because if you remember the picture, the land that we were looking at was the land outside of the holes. So our project became the donuts. So hence there were always donuts at our meetings. But the people that we worked with, and this is over extended periods, was an Indigenous reference group. We have 5 separate sessions, 3 on country and 2 in the Aboriginal Corporation offices. A 2-day youth design summit where young people went through a series of methods but ended up producing their future post-mine land uses in Minecraft, which were fabulous. And then we had a community panel session as well with 29 people over 5 sessions. So the same people over 5 sessions. What we came up with that was useful and usable were a set of principles. So rather than a roadmap or this is exactly what we want or is something that could be fixed, it was really what are the principles that particularly the current mine operators but also future land developers could put in place that would that the community would be accepting of or understanding of. So having multiple values and land uses, not just one big thing, and having it coordinated and organised, having different clusters of specialisation, bringing in circular economy principles, having ecological connectivity, enhanced livability. Some of these are fairly basic premises, but we ended up with a very interesting discussion around new energy, and nuclear was very topical at the time that we were undergoing the deliberations. And so I had to ask the community group, okay, we're looking at a range of, you're happy with new energy to be used here? We can have geothermal, we can have floating solar, we can potentially have wind turbines near here, we can have battery storage. Do we put nuclear on the list or not? And they said, well, look, if it can get through the planning principles and can agree with it, we'll accept it. So the planning principles were put up as robust, and they allowed that, as long as it met those conditions, it was considered fine. First Nations people had a different approach to this. We did 4 listening sessions, so we allowed them to ask any questions that they wanted of us and the operators and the government. And it was the last session where we had an extensive yarn, and this was captured in a biographic scribe. So this is the yarn itself. This is the output of that discussion of the things that were really, really important for them. And how they wanted that represented. And these are all direct quotes of the things that they considered most important for them, that they had active participation in decision-making, they wanted access to the lands, that they didn't want ownership of the lands, they just wanted to be able to go fishing if they wanted to. That there was the potential for new industries to actually establish an Aboriginal Future Fund, so there was money invested into the communities there. And that there was a culturally safe ecosystem that was being built so that any new development did it through a culturally safe and sensitive lens as well. So again, quite sensible and approachable priorities for them. And then talking about the gap, so in terms of lower expectations for life expectancy, health, education, etc. To them, what does success look like? The gap is closed. There is no gap. Young people had a different approach, and this is one of the collages that they started their thinking with, and I like these. This is a summary. It's pretty simple what they want for the future of the valley, but really key things for them were affordable housing. None of them thought that they'd be able to afford their own house. They wanted accessible recreation so they could move themselves around. They weren't reliant on their parents. But they had some really creative ideas of growing hemp in vertical farms, making hempcrete that could then extract CO2 from the atmosphere and create affordable intergenerational housing. So quite sophisticated ideas. We did this in a place-based perspective as well, again, learning from the expertise from the region and what sorts of activities would be appropriate in different areas and where there were opportunities. And there's a lot of detail here that I'm happy to share the slides with you. I won't go through each of these, of what each of these different land uses could look like or would be appropriate in these areas. So there's a whole range of different things that are specific to these sites. And then we came up with this idea of different precincts that could have different types of land uses. And this was, we intentionally didn't want to be prescriptive about this thing must happen in this place, but a biodiversity corridor was important that connected the two national parks together. So these principles can then be each taken out. So each of the mine operators can refer to these and say, this is the element that we're including in our post-mine land use plan, or this is what we're including, and this is how it speaks to this. So it's like a conversation between the community and the operators as to how these visions are being realised. And then I had my dear friend Kyle Bush, who's a landscape architect, take all of the text and all of the script from all of the community sessions and turn those into visual renders of what a future state could be. And so these are actually lines of sight across each of the mines, taking in elements from the actual region here. These are not AI generated, these are the proper renders. But it helps when we take these to the community to say, can you see yourself in this future? What do you like about this? What don't you like? And the operators can use this as well. Yes, we can use this element, or this element occurs. We can see this happening here in post-mine land use. So they're, again, a conversation piece, and they're not locking people into a specific, this must happen in this place, but it gives people a vision and a positive future that they can participate in. So how is this being used? Again, useful and usable was one of our mandates. So it's enabling the community itself to develop an independent shared vision and reference point for the Latrobe Valley that can be referred back to in time. It's informed each of the declared mine rehabilitation plans of the 3 mines of the Latrobe Valley. It's also informed our local Aboriginal corporation's position statement on mine rehabilitation. And it's informing the next iteration of the Latrobe Valley Regional Rehabilitation Strategy, which is up for review at the moment. It's being used in teaching modules in post-mine land use for local schools here, and it's also being used as a framework for collaborating in other regions around the country. I just have this slightly sad note, though. If you recall before, I mentioned all of the fabulous things that came out of the mine fire inquiry. Unfortunately, our state has now defunded each of these. And so this goes back to leadership and governance, and why having a vision is really, really important, because you can't necessarily put all your eggs in one basket. So where did I, hang on, I've missed the hunter slide. Where is the hunter slide gone? Oh, sorry. I can just talk to that in a minute. I did have a slide of why the hunter is different. Now, I might have to go and find that as well. I can just talk to it instead. Things I find really different in the hunter, which is you have no lack of plans. You have so many strong voices and powerful voices, lots of visions of what you'd like the future to be. The coordination of those might be a little interesting, but at least you've got a lot of good people with a lot of good ideas. You've got a strong population base, you've got so many assets in the region, and you're not afraid to share them as well. So I think there's so many different positives with the hunter. Of course, your coal-fired power stations may be closing, and hats off to AGL and the work you've been doing with Liddell in that gentle phasing out and respect of the community. I know that some of your learnings from the Latrobe Valley of what not to do. So we've got a lot to learn back from you again. But of course, you're going to be continuing with export for some time. So it's challenging for local communities to get their head around this as being a transition when the trains are still going past through the night. So I understand it's a different conversation there. But yeah, secret source, thinking about whose future you're actually planning for. Is it local communities, or is it the voters in the capital cities? Is it your rights holders, or is it your shareholders? And is it just looking after your future workers or thinking about your current workers or the future generations that are coming behind instead and the opportunities for them. Really key issues about tenure, governance, and leadership. So tenure is a really tricky one. And again, you've got great examples of the Hunter of being able to plan for your post-mine land use at the same time that you're planning for closure and rehabilitation, which is fantastic, rather than having to wait for one state and then go through the approval process again. The more we can speed up and fill that gap in the middle, the better that's going to be for everybody. But understanding that, the current mine operators are not going to be responsible for the future land uses. So you're going to have differences in planning and differences in responsibilities over time. So the more of those players that you can get in the same room, so you have that succession plan for the land, the better that's going to be. And of course, First Nations organisations have rights and have an interest for active involvement in whatever the future comes next, because they're not going anywhere. It's their land, they're not going anywhere. Understanding what the future land use can be, although it may not be the responsibility of the current land operators or mine operators, knowing where you're going is really important, and being able to sequence those things so that one future land use isn't going to impact one that might come further down the track. So having that, not necessarily a master plan, but an overarching vision or concept is really useful, so you know what you're working towards and can have that more regional approach. And thinking about these spaces really as assets. You've got a lot of space, you've got brownfield sites, you can do noisy things. We had someone who does live music concerts, big open air concerts. He said he can't get a license to do anything in the Latrobe Valley. He'd love to do one on some mine land where there'd be no one to complain about it. So thinking about these sites through an opportunity lens. Smelly things, intensive piggeries, not everybody loves them, but people do like bacon. It's got to come from somewhere. So think about these sites in a more creative way. The opportunities, yes, you need to consider the risks, but trying to look through the opportunity lens, not just the deficit risk lens. And if you run out of ideas, here's Will Rifkin's favourite book, 102 Things to Do with a Hole in the Ground. So I'd like to just thank you for your attention. I've got 2 QR codes here if you're still into scanning, and that will give you access to the reports that inform the second half of this. I might put some other links in the chat, but I am very open to your questions now.
Thanks very much, Jess. That was a really interesting presentation, and you certainly covered a lot of ground, and we really appreciate you sharing all that with us. I did like your remarks about the significant interest and differences that are here in the Hunter. Sometimes I joke that the future of the Hunter is in preparing plans about the future of the Hunter. There's a significant industry around that at the moment, but it was really interesting to hear some of your thoughts and ideas. So we might now go to questions, and Lisa, I might ask you to run through the questions that have come through.
Yes, so we've got a few questions in the chat. I'll just read them out for you, Jess. Who do you wish was in the room during your Latrobe efforts, and who was not in the room? Who was it difficult to get into the room, and why?
Oh, asking me to air my dirty laundry here. I got to check who's on the call. No.
It's a safe space.
Yeah, we put a lot of effort into getting people in the room, and I did a lot of calls beforehand and calls afterwards to be really careful of who could say what in the room at the time. The person who stood on the organisation that stood on the outside of the room or on the edge of the room, I would say, the wallflower, I would say, is the local council. They have experienced they didn't want to set expectations that were too high that the community members would then now expect them to deliver on. So they came from that sort of challenge of not wanting to overpromise and not being able to deliver. So they did participate. They were a partner. Their logos on the reports, and that was endorsed. But they were very cautious. And I do think that local leadership is critical to success.
That's interesting. We have another question in the chat. So consultation fatigue is a real issue in the Upper Hunter. I think it's probably an issue ever at the moment. Particularly when trying to establish community-led initiatives, what advice would you give for asking community members for their time when you've been asked to contribute to so many different discussions, committees, forums?
Yeah, well, look, donuts helped a lot, but they only go so far. Respecting people's time. So we gave people vouchers for participation. We put on meals. We gave them access to experts. So they got to ask, we didn't just ask them questions. They got to ask their questions and have their questions answered. And that was really important. So every session was foregrounded with what is it that you need to know to be able to fully participate in this forum. And we will get you the answers, and we'll take you on site, and we'll give you access to things that other people don't get access to. So it's really respecting people's time and ensuring that there's an outcome. So to be able to say the things that you contributed towards have gone towards the closure plans. Like, here it is. That's it's written in there. So I don't think people are fatigued at being asked what they want. It's about seeing it actually realized into something. That's where the gap is. And donuts.
This is not in the chat, so this is a me question. So based on all the case studies you talked about and all the regions that you've looked at, often I think there's been a different leader in the transition, or who's kind of leading that kind of work there. Do you think it's critical that there is a clear leader, or can it be, divvied up between multiple different entities?
I am super supportive of the collaborative governance model, which is where the governance and the leadership is shared between the key stakeholders and rights holders. And that way, if, as has happened to us a number of times, like the Latrobe Valley Authority wrote the regional transition plan and then got defunded 6 months later. So having all your eggs in one basket is really risky. But if you have all the key people that you need to inform the decision, actually co-create the decision, it may not be the optimal thing, but it's something. And it builds that trust, and you can build on that foundation. So an understanding of who's driving the space is important. That mix of private, public and community and First Nations is important if you can get it, and accepting that they are going to want to drive in slightly different areas. So again, that small step that's together is going to get you a lot further than lots of different things in opposite directions.
If people are able to take themselves off mute if they have any questions, so feel free to please ask anything of Jess.
We have got one other question in the chat, which is soon we'll have transition authorities in 4 regions, and only $25 million per annum. Should state government be the leader in this area? Previous expert panels were disbanded.
That's a hard question I know some of the context, but not all of it. I think some leader is good, but independence goes a long way. So if they're a leader in terms of a funder, or can create the space, but then let others step into that space to really occupy it, I think is most effective. State governments change, priorities change. So I think the more ground up you can get, the more authentic the outcome is going to be. But again, I'll defer to collaborative governance every time. But a leader is good. Yeah. Some leadership is very welcome.
Are there any other questions that anyone would like to ask? We've probably got another time for 1 or 2 more, perhaps.
Could I just note, while people are thinking of that, Hedda's got her plug in the chat there, and I'd like to plug an event as well, if you're happy for me to do that in here.
Yeah, and Hedda's got a hand up, so I might throw it to Hedda.
Thank you. I can unmute myself now. Yes, there's a plug in the chat that you can read. I won't take up the time of saying that. But Jess, I think one of the challenges that we have in the Hunter that makes it different to Latrobe is that we're talking about many more mines, and mines that have a much longer and diverse time span in terms of the closure. So, we're looking at some mines closing now, or in the process of closing towards 2030, other mines not closing until 2048, and then of course the potential of further expansion of coal before that. Stephen Galloway gave a talk last week, where he emphasized that he does not believe that there will be an end to coal mining in the valley. I would be curious to hear your thoughts on how we as a community here can approach the need for mine planning or mine closure planning cohesively when we have such an ongoing, I guess, competing sense of interests in the field.
Oh, look, I appreciate your question, Hedda. I would take it as a massive advantage rather than a whole industry pulling out at once, which is what we're seeing here. And it does put a lot of pressure on the first one. Like Mount Arthur is going to be interesting to see what happens there, but it's not the first one. We know there's other mines in Hunter as well that have already, closed, in areas that have been redeveloped that we don't talk about so much. But yeah, it's a lot of pressure to do Mount Arthur well, but it's also an invitation for the community in the region to see what is possible. And I think once, the first one's done in a large scale, or at least understanding what that process is, there's a lot of education that goes in the first one. We're finding here with Ongi, with Hazelwood, they're going to have to do a lot of the heavy work of they're going through their environmental effects statement first, they're going through water issues first. They're the trailblazers for the region. So the first one will always have the biggest challenge, but then once that becomes a reality, once that gets easy, it does get easier for the others. It's not impossible. It's visible. It's possible, and you might want to do it differently or better, whatever that looks like. But at least that one's done. So I would say you have some advantage of, the more staggered approach, even though it's prolonged.
I think that might be all the time we have for questions now. It's just gone 1 o'clock. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining the webinar today, and a huge thank you to Jess for sharing your wealth of knowledge on this amazing topic. As I said to everyone, we will publish this recording on our Dialogue website, so you can revisit that or share that friends and colleagues. And if there are any questions we didn't get to, we're happy to provide a response to those with the recording. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.